All right, sorry about that. I thought we were live and now we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third Saas-Fee Summer Institute of Art public lecture series for this year's program, Deep Ecology in the Cognitive Capitalocene. For those of you who do not know, Saas-Fee Summer Institute of Art is a roaming nomadic summer academy that was founded in Saas-Fee, Switzerland in 2015 and had many programs after that in Berlin, as well as Los Angeles and New York. And we are here in Brooklyn, New York, in partnership with the Brooklyn Rail. And we're very excited for today's lecture with Victoria Vesna, as well as her collaborator, Siddharth, who will be joining us as well. So let me hand it over now to Barry to introduce our guest speakers for today.
Thanks, Sarita. Yeah, I'm going to try and be brief, even though there's a lot to say about both of our speakers. Victoria Vesna is really one of the pioneering artists in the use of communication technologies, including the internet, for artwork, and she's also, for some decades now, really been at the forefront of research into intersections of art and technology. She is a professor at the UCLA Department of Design, Media Arts, and director of the Art Sci Center at the School of the Arts and California Nanosystems Institute. Her work involves long-term collaborations with composers, nanoscientists, neuroscientists, evolutionary biologists, and she has published in some edited volumes, including Database Aesthetics, Art in the Age of Information Overflow in 2007, and in 2011, Context Providers, Conditions of Meaning in Media Arts. And she is going to be speaking to us today with her colleague, one of the people that she collaborates with, and that is Siddharth Ramakrishnan. Siddharth is a neuroscientist. He is an associate professor of biology and the Jenny M. Carruthers Chair in Neuroscience at the University of Puget Sound in Washington. He's currently in New York as the director of research at Borough of Manhattan Community College, part of the CUNY system. His research spans developmental biology, neuroendocrinology, and neuroethics. He has many more credentials at hand, but I don't think we need to go through all of them. I can tell you that I'm really looking forward to hearing what Siddharth and Victoria have to present today.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. Thank you first to Warren, who is doing this pedagogy that's really important right now because education is kind of going down the hill. And of course, he's a dragon, so that's an amazing thing. And thank you, Sarita, who's a wonderful horse, and Amy in the background, the rooster. I'm a pig, Siddharth is a sheep. And I come to you from Motovun, which is a small village in Croatia. Siddharth's coming to you from India. And you, of course—
Berardi also is the co-director, so he's involved in inviting you also, just to make sure. Because I know we did it last minute, so you might not have known that. But anyway, sorry,
And besides, I'm a dragon.
I was just going to say that you're a dragon. So there's two dragons that are leading the course here, which is incredible. A lot of fire energy. Unfortunately, Putin is a dragon too, so there's a big fight going on now.
Oh no, sorry, mistake. I'm a rooster.
Oh, you're a rooster. Okay, well, the announcer. That's really cool. Anyway, so we have 3 continents covered, and we're really pleased to be here, and I'm so happy that I'm able to connect from this small place, and that Siddharth is able to connect from India. And Siddharth, can you say hello and just tell everybody where you are, and hopefully both of us will keep this wire going.
Hi everyone, I'm Siddharth. And thank you for the spontaneous invite. I'm right now in Chennai in Southeast India, where it's super hot and super humid, but I'm really glad to join you all. So.
And it's super hot here too. It's super hot in New York. It's super hot pretty much in a lot of the world. And we are dealing with a lot of issues. And this project, I would like to give you a little background about it. And Siddharth, please chime in. One of the reasons that I invited Siddharth last minute is just on the off chance that he can connect, because this has very much been something that the two of us have been working on together for quite a few years now. I would say 14 years, if I didn't lose count. And it started at kind of a sit down, having coffee together, and my asking Siddharth if he didn't have to worry about funding and promotions and all the usual stuff. He was the postdoc, by the way, at that point at UCLA. What would you study? And he said the Hox gene. And so I got very intrigued. What is that? And this is a kind of the logo that we came up with eventually. But I'll actually pass it on to Sid to explain what he told me that got me very, very intrigued. And I'll run the slides for him.
Yeah, I was very excited when Victoria asked me what I was interested in. And at that point, there's this topic called Evo-Devo, or evolution on development. And the idea is that when we look around us, we see all these creatures which look so different. There's an elephant with these big ears, and there's a snake with a long body and flies with wings. There's so many creatures, but if you look at the genes that control the different body types, it's the same set of 8 genes that have been passed on from over evolution. It's the same set of 8 genes that control what we look like. And this is something that was really, really cool, that even though we all look so different, underneath it all, we're all kind of the same. And now scientists can manipulate these genes and create monsters within these in the lab. So you can see like flies with like extra wings, and those with like legs on their heads and so on. And so you can actually like change these things and also create all these chimeras. And this is like legs coming out of a fly's head, and it's really possible. And if you think about it, our mythologies talk a lot about these kinds of chimeras. And here you have a goddess from the Indian mythology with 4 hands. And it could be that these were advanced beings who are able to manipulate their bodies in order to kind of create these like multi-limbed individuals. And this is also a quest that scientists are on right now, because who wouldn't want to regenerate or grow extra limbs or different kinds of functions? So that was something that we started exploring together.
And so the big issue was, how do you take something that gene that every single creature under the sun shares, whether it's a snail or an elephant or a human, and make a project out of it? And it came to me on a plane to China, where my daughter decided to live, fortunately or unfortunately, and me thinking about how everything's made in China, and then of course the I Ching. And I just thought this could be a good way to connect the idea of us as animals, us as related to this whole ecology and this world, and to connect it also to cultural issues, political issues, to food, and to all the animals being food. And a lot of cooking came out of it, which I'll talk about in a second. But these are the signs. And then as I started exploring it together with Siddharth, I suddenly realized that actually a lot of these signs are lab animals. And the animals on the zodiac, that would be us, are quite manipulated in the labs. They give us a lot back. We saw that with the vaccinations. That's thanks to the animals that we got that vaccine so quick. And we're part of this large experiment as well, so we're not kind of outside of it either. But these creatures are in the labs. And then these are mythology animals as well that have stories to be told, particularly the tiger. So we're in the year of the tiger, and it's a water tiger, and we also pay attention to that. We started with showing this project in Hong Kong and sitting at a table with people from Hong Kong who actually knew much, much more than us about the Chinese Zodiac. So very quickly, this became about a dialogue and about communicating with the audience, telling us what they think about themselves, about the animals, what sign they are, etc. But in Hong Kong, as we were sitting there, we realized that everybody wanted to eat. And so I'll just stop here for a second and pull up some other slides. But Sid can tell you he was very jet lagged, and he went out to look around and just explore. And I'll let you take it from there, Sid.
Yeah, Hong Kong was really great because I found like a whole street of mannequins, and we kind of put that in our art installation of trying to show how the human form can be manipulated by these genes. But we created a table with, and we went to a local apothecary to get herbs. And we found that there are different Chinese herbs that are governed by the different zodiacs, and that, and then they also govern different parts of the body. So, for example, the horse has a certain herb that helps with the heart, or the monkey has goji berries that helps with a different kind of function. So there are all these animals which are associated with these body parts, which have specific herbs related to them. And as we sat at the table in the Hong Kong exhibit, we realized that the local population had a lot of insight into it, and that we could even delve a lot into these food groups about it. And this is like how we were installing it at the Microwave New Media Festival in Hong Kong way back in 2011. That's when this was happening.
So what's happening here, sorry, is that we learned that each animal has a ruling organ. And more importantly than that, that we all have all animals in it. That is all the organs. But you have a ruling organ. So for instance, for the horse, it's the heart, etc. And we started exploring with Siddharth's background Ayurvedic recipes that were medicinal for that particular organ. And then further on, looking at Western medicine. So let's take the heart, for instance. You have what's good for the heart in Western medicine and Chinese medicine and Ayurveda in relation to food. And then whether you eat animals or not, and whether you eat yourself or not. And this, of course, brought up all kinds of issues that are both cultural and political and environmental, of course.
And it was also a nice synergy because, like, if you looked at the heart, and actually the horses are used in science experiments to measure heart function. So there were a lot of these synergies that came in from the scientific side as well into these investigations.
And the tiger, the ruling organ of the tiger are the lungs. And that's also something that's very important right now with the pandemic. So there were a lot of these correlations, and eventually we started moving away from just having the discussion table, which is the second one where we learned a lot here too in Taipei. Taipei and Hong Kong were very important to us because in mainland China, after the Cultural Revolution, a lot of this knowledge has been wiped away and is left in these very kind of stereotypical interpretations of the zodiac, very similar to the Western zodiac interpretations. But Taipei and Hong Kong have retained a lot of this knowledge. So we're really learning a lot and starting different experimentations and developing different ways of doing this. And finding out that actually we have really important discussions that get sometimes very deep, intense, but sometimes very light, and about food and how we exist with other animals. So here are just some examples. There's LA, here's New York at Linda Weintraub's house. In Vienna, I had a residency, and then later we had another residency in Paris where we were exploring further. Here's Japan, and I'm showing you this also because what happened as we were exploring this is that the same set of ingredients were interpreted very differently. So you'll see as we keep discussing how much food is cultural and how you can see everything through food. And that's why I really wanted to talk today to the students about food, because there's a famine happening as we speak. You know, people are saying it's impending. No, it's happening as we speak, and it's devastating. And it's not just humans that are in famine, but also animals. All animals are affected. Just recently, I don't have a slide, unfortunately, but I can pull it up later. Mariam Razi, who's from Tehran, and she's been working with me for the past couple of years, went back to Tehran and she had a dinner there. And so again, there was a whole nother set of issues that were brought up, completely different interpretation of the food ingredients that we gave. And she had to keep it private because it was something she was working with America. They didn't wear the hijab in the space, and we just heard stories about it, but we couldn't see anything. So this is something that grew organically. Nobody invited us to do it, but we just kept doing it as a great way to discuss a lot of these subjects. So, Siddharth, the rat.
Rats. We really love the rat because it's one of the most important animals in the scientific investigation. And as Victoria mentioned, the fact that we have a vaccine so quickly is because of all the rats that have sacrificed themselves for that purpose. And pretty much all mammalian systems, they are being investigated in the rats. And what you're seeing is tumor-filled rats, and here's a rat temple where the rats are being revered and they drinking the milk over there. And I've actually been there. It's a really cool place. And here's rats being eaten.
So we have 3 rats in the room, and you shouldn't feel disgusted because you're actually contributing a lot to humanity, and we really revere you. And this is the rat brain, which is quite elaborate.
Yeah, there's a brain bow. It's called a brain bow, where they have coded RGB into the neurons, and so you can track different cells all over the rat brain.
Yeah, there's a whole issue now, since we're talking to New York, with the rats in relation to the people in New York. And I don't know how much you followed, but there's been kind of rat wars after everything closed down, because a whole kind of dynamic was developed with the restaurants and the rats. And when the restaurants closed, the rats only had to scatter around. Now that everybody's back in the city, apparently they're seeing, and I've been in the city and I witnessed myself, a lot more rats. They're trying to reorganize just like the humans. It's an interesting kind of dynamic that we try to not think about, but a lot of rats are in cities coexisting with the humans. And then, of course, we have the ox that is sacred in India, where Siddharth is beaming from, and it's treated quite awfully. We have some famous people under the sign of the ox. So Siddharth usually likes to ask how much water we need to create one hamburger. Do you know? Does anybody know? What was it, Siddharth? Do you remember? It was like a huge amount of gallons of water.
I don't know.
I can't remember either, but I honestly, I don't want to say the wrong figure, but I will say at this point that we in no way are saying that you should or shouldn't eat meat of any sort. We're saying that you should have an awareness of what you're eating, how you're eating it, and how these animals contribute to your life. So here's some images from the cattle, and I'll leave this for the students to find out. Of course, it's cultural too, and there's a lot of debates about how they're treated. And then the bovine serum is used in a lot of medical procedures. So they also contribute to us in ways that a lot of people don't think about too much. And then we have the tiger. And the tiger is really important actually in mythology. It's really disappearing. There's a whole story of how it's treated, of course, in the West, but it's very sad actually the way it's used, and it's also food in some countries. And here I should mention that what we discovered as far as dogs, rats, and cats being food, which people get horrified about, they were starting to be eaten by people when there was famine. So again, the animals contributed to the survival of the humans. And cats are used in research as well, a lot for movement. So I'm not sure if this figure is still correct. Somebody can do some research as well, but the number of tigers that's disappearing is really awful. We're talking about tigers in the wild.
Yeah, one good thing that came out of the pandemic is the tiger population increased a little bit because of the lack of movement of people around. And there's been more recognition that how much animals have kind of retaken areas when the pandemic hit. But sadly, it looks like we're going back to what was normalcy again for us before. They just mentioned that tourists in India have gone back to like bursting proportions, and now they are going to sensitive areas and ecologically fragile areas and contributing to destroying them again. So
we're seeing that in every aspect. Here in Europe, for instance, Germany is going back to coal. The waters are getting messed up again. It's just one step forward, three back. So how do we get 4 steps in front is the real question. And this is the big tragic part of the tigers, how it's being used in Chinese medicine in particular, and how nonsensical it is. So I won't go into this much deeper than to say that tiger brain is supposed to cure laziness and pimples, and I'll just stay with that. I mean, it's terrible that these amazing creatures are being just killed off for ridiculous reasons. Then we come to the rabbit, and there's 2 rabbits in the room. Hello. I have to say that rabbits are actually very much in the culture, as we can see here, and the white rabbit, but also in science as well. Most recently, the Chinese have actually, at the very beginning of the pandemic, interestingly, they have landed on the other side of the moon, which is an incredible feat. And they called that mission White Rabbit, which is in their mythology as well. That's the image of their version of the rover. And then, of course, these 2 famous chefs eating rabbit. Which again is cultural and again is related to famine. Maybe Sid, you can say a few words about the.
Yeah, so rabbits are used a lot in science research because they have beautiful big eyes. So there's actually a picture of the inner eye of the rabbit, and that's what you're looking at here. And they use it a lot in that. And of course, a lot of they use in cosmetic research too. They test out to see if something is sensitive to the skin on rabbits. And this picture is of producing antibodies in rabbits, which we use a lot in our scientific experiments.
So quite a few rabbits were used for this recent pandemic because of the antiviral research. I'm sure it still is. And the techniques are a lot of times necessary, a lot of times not necessary. And I think at this point, I would like to mention how scientists are addressing this. This is an image, of course, by Eduardo Katz with the rabbit, young rabbit. But I'll just stay here for a second. One of the things that Siddharth brought to my attention that I wasn't aware of is the relationship of a scientist in the lab to the animal. And in particular, he was working with rat brains and having a kind of a relationship of gratitude for that animal sacrificing its life for the science gave him better results. And I think the same is true for food and eating, and the same is true for being aware of the animals that are being sacrificed for people to survive. And then, of course, the waste that we'll touch on a little bit later. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, it's true. I think when science initially started, most scientists were naturalists, and they were trying to understand about the animal and not using the animal, but at least exploring the animal in order to understand more about it. But I think over time, it's become more human focused, and therefore we're using animals as tools as opposed to learning more about the creatures themselves. So as a scientist, I find that if we feed the animal and grow them and learn more about them, then you get more information and you're able to get more benefits out of the experiments with them, as opposed to just thinking of them as another tool in your box and then exploring it that way. So that's something that I'm imparting to my students as well. It's something really important, I think.
And in relation to the project, we started inviting artists who work with animals. For instance, Kathy High did a whole piece on saving the animals, the rats that were supposed they were supposed to just be put away, and putting a video camera on them, giving them a name, and just giving some humanity to these animals that were tested on. And many artists, as you know, work with animals. So we're really interested in bringing that into the discussion with the scientists who also work with animals and with people who are breeding animals for food.
It's almost like a parallel between the industrialization of food and the industrialization of scientific labs almost. So yeah.
Not almost, it's a definite parallel. It's the damning of our society. So we have we have a dragon in the room who actually is the head of this program, Warren, and the ruling organ is the stomach, and then we look at what tastes are connected. I'm just breaking it down a little bit for you. This has become such a layered project that I literally teach a 10-week class with it, because there's so much to be discussed in relation to food, and it even was and still is hosted by Food Studies at UCLA. So here's some famous dragon people, including Warren. I should add him there, and some inheritors of the real dragon. Of course, in mythology, it's big. And what we've noticed, which is super interesting, is that in the West, it's all about destroying and slaying the dragon. And in the East, it's like the most magnificent animal that needs to be celebrated. So we find a lot of these dichotomies culturally. I mentioned it earlier with the cow. It happens quite a bit. Here it is in Chinatown. And then we have the dragon fruit and the research that's conducted with lizards that are kind of the inheritors of the dragon, that are, by the way, disappearing a lot. And a lot of scientists are quite concerned about it because it's going to shift again the kind of balance of the ecology. Siddharth, you want to chime in for the research bit?
Yeah, so what you're seeing in that is scientists are a bit nerdy, so they name plant proteins and things after animals, and like a dragon protein, which is a receptor that binds to certain toxins, and that's what you're seeing out there. And also the heat sensation of this particular lizard, which is using for identifying objects around, is what the bottom picture is showing.
And of course, they were learning a lot from the skin of the chameleon being changed. So let's see if I have an image of that. This is Jung's imagery.
And the whole, they talk about how Velcro was inspired by the gecko's feet.
Gecko, exactly. And this is some dragons on a, not dragons, lizards on a stick. And if you notice here, there's like a little seahorse there that snuck in. So yeah, so this is the chameleon that I was mentioning earlier. That a lot of research is being done on that. How much we're learning from biomimicry and from animals is also incredible. And here we are in the lab looking at their eggs, the lizard eggs.
And they don't have I don't know about dragons, but lizards don't have DNA for sex. The temperature determines the sex of the progeny. So it's really fun. Like the whichever is on top or the bottom, they get more heat, and so they'll change sex based on that, basically. So
it's just so awesome. And then we have a snake, and there's 3 snakes in the room. The ruling organ is the spleen. We just recently had what we're starting now is one animal at a time, and we recently had an honoring of the snake. And Cece Hart, I'll show you an image of that later, actually created snake broth, and she ordered the snake from Amazon and created the broth.
Rattlesnake, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then she ate the snake live for us because she was enacting the Ouroboros, which was quite beautiful. Anyways, it's deep in our psychology, both in fear and mythology, of course, in India, and the Kundalini, who a lot of you are probably familiar with, the energy. And there's so many stories that we tell at the dinner tables about these animals. One being of, how much a snake can eat, how much it changes. I'm really rushing through this just to give you more the kind of a larger scope and to have enough time for question answer. But what we have here is also how much research has been conducted to this with the snake. Of course, the venom we know about, and then the night vision that's used actually by the military. If you want to chime in, Sid, please do. No, we're good. Okay, here we are. So you can kind of see the heat sensitivity that's actually very similar to the lizard. So dragon, on the Chinese wheel, dragon is right next door to the snake. So what you see is these kind of related issues and research as well. Here you're looking at the venom, which is also being used quite a bit. And then there's snake broth and dishes and food that's also been ignored. Sarita is a horse, and I think she's the lonely horse in the group, as far as I can tell from now. But here we have another example of cultural dichotomy. So in Japan and France, for instance, it's considered something wonderful. In the US, people are horrified about eating horse meat. In certain countries, they actually tell stories about how horses allowed for people to survive. Now they're used quite a bit in therapy. We, of course, know a lot about the mythology of the horse, the unicorn. This is an image of horses used in therapy that's becoming really something that's super helpful, especially for autistic children. And then we have the honorable sheep. Siddharth is here. Actually, Siddharth, you're the only sheep in the room, so I'm so glad you joined. And next month, we're going to honor the sheep. And here's some famous people of the sheep. Maybe you know how much it takes to raise the sheep. It's also incredibly demanding. We just saw I just saw a great picture of these sheep on trees, and they're used
a lot in sleep research because they have these hormones, and you can actually they have a lot of blood, right? So you can draw them, and so a lot of hormonal research and sleep research is done. And also, they did a lot of research on stressing out sheep, and the way you stress out a sheep is to first isolate it, and then you put it in the dark, and then you play barking dog noises at it. And then they use the same thing in Guantanamo Bay to torture prisoners, to have multiple levels of stress. And poor sheep.
Yeah, and of course we know that if you want to go to sleep, you count sheep, right? A lot of us grew up with that. They in China, they're actually very, very much following this on every level, whether it's politically or economically. And they did research on what is the largest number of millionaires, and apparently it's the sheep. So I'm waiting for Sid to get rich.
The top left, you're seeing a goat which has been genetically engineered to produce spider silk in its milk. So they're using that to create milk and kind of create textiles with the strong spider silk in it. And of course you can see Dolly. Yeah.
Dolly, right. And just as a little side fact, the scientists named Dolly after Dolly Parton. And the first clone was died. The sheep died very quickly. And everybody was saying, oh, cloning doesn't work. Well, it turns out that an old sheep was cloned. So now they tried doing it with the young ones and no problem. So cloning works. Anyway, another sideline.
Barbara Streisand cloned her puppies or something. So
yes, and by the way, when we started the project, everybody said, all scientists said, no way can mammals be cloned. Humans will never be cloned. But as we kept going, here we are. Monkeys were cloned and humans too. So there's some food, some sheep, of course, and then monkey. By the way, of all science in the room, and I think there's 30 people here, unless somebody came in late, we're missing a monkey. And we always honor and think about the animal that we're missing. So here's a monkey. This is a wonderful image of a mirror image of a monkey. And they're just pretty amazing as our closest relatives, I guess. And people do eat monkeys as well. And of course, in India, you have the Ganesh, that's the protector.
Hanuman.
Hanuman. Ganesh is the elephant. And then the monkey temples, anybody who's visited, you'll know, they'll definitely catch your attention and maybe even steal some stuff. Also, there was, Siddharth, you can mention this as well. There was during the pandemic, a real kind of problem with the tourists not coming along with the monkeys. Do you want to mention?
Yeah, I think it was even in Japan, I think, where there were a lot of monkeys were starving because the tourists were not visiting spots. In India, they started overrunning a lot of cities in the north of India because they want to go and look for food. Yeah.
And so what's coming to our attention now is that not that humans are starving, animals are starving, there's a species are disappearing, and we really are trying in every possible way to remind us and others that we are animals, part of this very intertwined ecology. And with this famine that's happening now, with the Ukraine war actually making it much worse, it becomes really critical to think like this. So the monkey has been incredibly important to our society and to also research, as I showed very briefly. I'm rushing a little bit because I want to leave time for the audience. Sid, if you want to mention anything, please.
Just that monkey research is a problematic, and it takes a lot of effort. And sometimes one monkey, which is in a research lab, is used for decades. So it brings a lot of questions about ethics, about working with primates, and what can you get from an incarcerated monkey, which is being used for experiments for over 20 years or something like that. So.
Like this guy. And then there's been this idea that in the past, Ilya Ivanov has created a human ape with experiments. It's never been proven, but it's a possibility, I discovered. They've helped us go to space. And we see them here as well, being sent in front of us. And then, of course, the cognition is pretty amazing, how much they can do. We have 3 roosters in the room, and roosters are amazing as kind of announcers of the new day. And that's a lot in our mythology. It's also a big, big industrial production, not roosters, but chickens, which is obviously related, and quite problematic in many ways that I can go into or not. This is the embryo of the
this is an embryo
chicken.
You can see the heart developing and all the blood vessels. It's really pretty.
And then other kind of mythological ideas. We come to the dog. I'm not sure if there's a dog in the room, but definitely another deep, deep, deep relationship with humans and also food. That happened during the famine in China, is what we discovered. But a lot of food that's still being eaten in the West or in different parts of the world that don't need to eat them continue as a kind of a culinary exercise. So we try to bring that to people's attention too. Here's the market with dogs. It's very cultural. I was offered dog once in south of China, and I have to say I couldn't eat it, even though I kept saying I'll eat anything that's offered with love. It's just, that's where I stopped. I couldn't. But you cannot judge either, because we eat a lot of meats that are considered sacred in other places. They have an incredible sense of smell. In fact, Siddharth and I did a project on dog nose, and it was fantastic because we actually figured out that dogs can smell so much that they become an extension of us, much more than any machine. And anytime there's like real kind of tragedy, there they are. They come out to search and rescue canines, and of course they went to space as well. And then we have the Pavlov, a little joke there. And finally, we have the pork, the pig, which is yours truly. And at first I was like, oh my God, I'm a pig, but I'm so proud to be this animal that is just so incredible and giving. Every single aspect of the pig is being used and experimented on. this is a map of all that the pig ends up in, and it goes even into bread and film and crayons, makeup, etc. So I'll stop there because I'm hoping that that was enough food for thought to get some audience response. And we don't see anybody, but we see the signs, so that's good.
Thank you so much for that talk. So I can take questions from our group inside of Zoom, and as well as people on YouTube. We have the chat up. If you want to ask questions, I'll share those over as well. While people are kind of gathering their thoughts, one thing that you said at the very end made me think about a discussion I'm sure we're going to be having with Warren in a couple of days about the relationship between you were talking about dogs, and the relationship with that humans have with animals, almost like as an extension of our sensory. And Warren, I'm thinking here about, some discussions that I'm sure we'll have that were mentioned also in the program text about some of Stiegler's ideas about how humans evolve in relationship to technology. And one thing that I hadn't really thought about is, usually technology is thought of as objects or something like this, but also this interrelationship with other animals as something that affects our evolution as well as their evolution. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about this co-evolution that humans have with other animals.
Well, really, that is very much the core of this project. And it evolved, even the project evolved on its own organically, because we were looking at what the issues are industrialization. And the industrialization basically separated disciplines, and that separation of disciplines created so many problems that we're in. Part of it is also to separate from what we call nature and animals, and to look at it holistically and as a problem of complexity, and to have the empathy to place ourselves in that space of suffering and feeding and eating, and not necessarily all being negative, but just to understand the complexity of it, is really, as far as we feel, a step towards evolving further into where we need to be. And this is why I'm so happy that Siddharth joined me, because it's so important that artists talk and work directly with scientists and technologists to enable that change, because scientists and technologists have been separated, segregated, not only physically within academia, but also within sciences themselves. So if you take any branch of science, for instance, let's stay with neuroscience in this case, and I'll pass it on to Sid. When I went to the Brain Mapping Center at UCLA when I first arrived, I was very curious and I wanted to go in and look. And it was amazing how they were all separated by different parts of the brain research, and then didn't even know each other. And how can one possibly do something that's impactful when it's done like that? So this kind of segregation is what we're trying to address, of topics as well. When we're talking about scientific experiments, disease, food, agriculture, animals, humans, all of this comes into it when we just sit at a dinner table. So in a way, as technologically advanced as the issues we're addressing are, and we do get into some pretty intense discussions that are scientific, depending on who's sitting at the table, we also insist that the dinners are actually just about sitting down, eating, and telling stories, because this is what we're missing. Everything is mediated, everything is technology, even when it's just sitting down and eating. So do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution and animals are extension of ourselves, and I mean, the whole point that became an agrarian society and were able to cultivate plants and have herd cows and have like a supply of milk and meat and things like that, allowed us to settle and grow into townships and cities and um, allowed humans to be in single places and not just keep wandering as hunter-gatherers. And then we then use horses to travel. So at every point of evolution of the human race, we've used animals as a means to move forward. And the next step is happening as we speak. We are now growing human organs in animals, and we are soon going to have heart replacements from pigs or other kidneys that are being grown in animals, and or insulin being grown in bacteria. So we are using animals as we speak to move to that next level of human advancement or evolution, you might call it. So it's completely intricate, and it's an integral part of all these animals. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Emily. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I have 2 questions. The first one is talk a lot about the contributions and sort of the things that animals are able to sort of give to humans and aid in human development and things like that. And I was wondering where you put sort of animal agency, like animal autonomy, animal determinism into that conversation. And then so thinking less of more of like a collaboration and less of a like use in terms of like a piece of technology. And then secondly, I'd also like to hear more about how you decided to focus on the Chinese Zodiac as your sort of organizing principle. Thank you.
So those 2 questions are actually related, and I'll start with the second one. I did mention earlier, the Chinese Zodiac emerged in the sense that everything is made in China. We are surrounded by all the technology that's made in China, and the awareness of it was very much with us. And even noticing that food was being shipped over from China, but also thinking about and traveling to China and thinking about the Chinese Zodiac and realizing that if you, what is your sign, for instance, the person asking the question, Emily? Emily, what animal are you?
Snake.
So exactly. So once you have a direct connection relationship to the snake, the way human nature is, you instantly have more interest because it's somehow connected to your identity. Whether you believe in the Chinese Zodiac or not is irrelevant, actually. It's just kind of interesting that that's the sign that was thrown at you. And I was looking for a way to connect so that it's not abstracted completely, but to connect somehow to the interest. And this automatically creates agency. I'm very interested and have done other works that are about nonverbal communication with aliens like octopi and other animals. So I think we're really underestimating these animals that are being used and objectified and industrialized as humans are. So it's also not saying that we're somehow separate from that. We, at least some of us in this Zoom room, are privileged, but there's a lot of people who are not. And some of them work for Amazon, and some of them are, in different part of the world starving because of our actions. So all of this interrelated complexity is what we're interested in relation to agency and animals.
Yeah, so when we first started, we were overwhelmed that all this diversity of body types existed, and we needed some entry point. And the Chinese Zodiac really presented a beautiful plethora of animals which had different body types. And as Victoria mentioned, you could invite the human animal to the table as this being. And so that relatedness immediately came in. And I've heard some theories about how cows, for example, have been the most successful in propagating its species because of the domestication. And that without help or the relationship with humans, the cow as a species would not have have such a tremendous amount of population. Well, how they live is a different question, but the number of cows which exist on the planet right now would not be the same without the human intervention that helped the propagation of the species.
And then, of course, there's the virus that the birth of it, quote unquote, was at the Wuhan animal market. So there's a message that's also coming from the animals that this kind of manipulation and industrialization and scientific research without that relationship of empathy and understanding of what's happening, whether it's being eaten or being exercised on or communicated with, to me is very much connected to this pandemic. Whether we learned that lesson or not is a whole nother discussion, but for sure it's at the core of what we're trying to say.
We have a question from the YouTube audience. I'll read here from Christina. Could you share some thoughts on how the dinners may have changed when you transferred to the more technologically mediated Zoom format of gatherings during the pandemic?
That's a very good question. Actually, and initially we thought it's impossible because, as I mentioned earlier, we really just wanted the unplugged dinners and then we would share our experiences later. But then as Earth Day rolled around at the very beginning of the pandemic, we understood how important it is for people to have some sense of community and how this community then became global. And people from all around the world were interested to share, and it actually grew. And I think it's true for education, for different projects, for this class as an example, that the technology made it much more accessible. The discussions became more interesting because we had people from Brazil. Clarissa Ribeiro was hosting a dinner. I just mentioned Mariam hosted a dinner in Tehran, and it just becomes a much larger community. But to address directly the actual planning of the dinners changed because we didn't want people to just sit at Zoom and look at each other. We were more interested that you have a dinner and you have your camera on the dinner, and then when your turn comes, you either bring the camera to it or you share the food or you talk about it. So it's literally having company at your dinner table, but not sitting at a Zoom like we are now. And it's been quite wonderful, actually, I have to say, surprisingly. And quite wonderful to still do them unplugged. So we're in this hybrid mode right now, I think, in everything, which has a lot of pluses, in fact, for this discussion, because ultimately it's about that interconnected system of agriculture, food that we're seeing now with Ukraine in particular, as a very obvious example of how societies on the other side of the planet can be impacted by societies that are, not even aware of what's going on. I think that awareness is being raised.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? Singzi? Did you have one? Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm also a pig. So we have that in common. And then I just have a couple questions about how do you think about, because I think the 12 zodiacs are coming from the Eastern philosophy and the Taoist tradition. And I was just wondering how you think about the relation, where you put that deep philosophical tradition and history and Taoist practice in relation to science. And also, I'm thinking about, because a lot of these philosophy and practices coming from mainland China as well. As you said, it's being kind of eradicated after the Cultural Revolution, and then but there are some still left, probably in like really rural parts or like not so capitalized parts of China. And I'm wondering if you looking to also collaborate with these people as well. Thank you.
Sure. Actually, I have. I spent some time at the Hangzhou Chinese Academy for Medical Arts, and then I went down to south of China to look at some ceramics and learn about it. And at the same time, what I said in the beginning rings still true. We don't try to be the experts in this. We want to learn as much as possible, but we would always invite people to the table who know more than us in that particular cultural realm. So the Chinese Zodiac becomes a framework, but it's not just about that. It's about how that framework gets changed through different interpretations, different cultures, different areas, including Western medicine, Ayurveda, Persian mythology, and also for China as well. It's kind of an influence of different interpretations to see what will emerge. So there's many things that have been said that are very deep from people who are expert in this area. And this happens at the dinner table, and we try to document it as much as possible and share it as much as possible with everybody. But at the same time, we're also very interested in other interpretations that overlap and complement this knowledge. And yes, it's true that there's more and more now in mainland China that's tapping back into this original knowledge, which is really wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that. But it's in no way can we ever have the knowledge as somebody from Europe and India of what China can offer, but we can say that China influences us deeply in many ways in the culture and production and industry. And it's very much part of our life that a lot of times is not recognized further from things. So we're interested also to highlight this knowledge that's just amazing, actually. I personally love the I Ching, for instance. Sid, do you want to say a few words? If you're still around.
Look like you.
Yeah, thank you everyone. It was really great. But I want to run for dinner. But it looks like one person had a question. I'll answer the question and then I'll run. So
okay.
Hi, thank you for that. I mean, it's a quick question. You and both Victoria, thank you so much for this talk.
Sure.
There's a lot of emotional responses going through my mind, but you mentioned about acknowledgement of this kind of relationship we have with animals and how much of our sustenance is, based on this relationship with animals and acknowledging that. But I sometimes wonder, where can it go beyond the acknowledgement? So I'm wondering about the way the science experiments happen with animals. Are there ways of thinking about it that could change that relationship perhaps a little bit differently? And that would be the same question for you as well, Victoria. Like, can we imagine a non-industrialized, farming, not just for animals, but for plants as well, where is it possible to alternative ways? I mean, I know it's already happening, but I think industrialized farming for animals and plants are just, it's so huge. And I think it's beyond individual responsibilities, and so.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Thank you so much.
I'll let Sid say his few words about scientific research, which also is so huge that you wonder, can one individual or a few individuals have an impact?
I've had, it's interesting, I don't know, I think the next generation of students, it feels like they're more aware of the environment and they're more aware of animal issues, and they're thinking more about human-animal interactions and communication, because I've heard through them about how, just like doctors take a Hippocratic oath, there should be something similar for scientists as well, on, as you mentioned, acknowledging the animal and the sacrifice it's making, and what that would look like. But I do think almost delinking the tool aspect of the animal and trying to be less anthropocentric in the outcomes. So just because you want to learn about human cancer is not the only reason you should work with that rat. You should have some other inherent feature of the rat itself that you're learning about, or you are becoming aware of. I think that's something that needs to be at the forefront, because it happens that, if I work for a large university and I need a rat, I'll order it from some company, it'll be delivered, and I'll work on it without ever knowing what it ate, how it behaves, or what its likes and dislikes are. And I think that's just not right. It's just not right to treat this living being like that. So I'm hoping that will change.
So it sounds to me, Hege, that you already have a lot to say about this, and I have a feeling you have thoughts on it yourself, and there's so much to be said about is it even possible, right? And I feel like we live in a world that's just all around. It seems like, is there any way this could possibly change? And the only thing that I feel can help is as many of us as possible to raise awareness about the interconnectivity from plants to animals to humans to bacteria to viruses to technologies to everything, and to shift that will automatically shift the way we do things, the way we live, our values and our value system. It's an automatic response. So it's pretty much a failure of our educational systems that need to be addressed. And I say that as somebody who's been a professor for many years, and Siddharth as well will agree with me. So we start there, and then we create projects that are in the arts or sciences or both, that bring in others who have the capability to communicate these ideas in a creative way.
Does anybody else? Please raise your hand if you have a question. But I actually wanted to ask you, Victoria, and I meant to ask Siddharth as well, but if you could situate this project within your larger practice, because we've also talked to you a few times about other works that you're involved with that are certainly equally, ecologically engaged. So I just want to know if you could tell us a few things about kind of basically what you're working on right now, and place this within your larger practice.
So it's interesting you're saying that, because this project just kind of wants to exist and keeps happening on its own. And it's definitely a more interesting way to have dinner parties, I'll tell you that. It's just actually fantastic because everybody gets to speak, everybody comes prepared. It's like a potluck. People come in with their own foods, but they have stories around it. And I also feel that the animals are calling out to us to bring it into the discussion, with the tiger being as an example, and this being the year of the tiger, and the Tiger King being the Netflix thing that everybody watches. But I keep learning about these animals through these dinner parties, and it connects absolutely to my practice. For instance, with the octopus, and I did a whole octopus brainstorming project you may be aware of. I discovered that it actually has a different Hogs gene. So it really actually is an alien. And then thinking about planktons and working with planktons and noise pollution, you can't help but realize that what's at the bottom of the food chain affects the top of the food chain, meaning the whales and us and food and microplastics, etc. So it's just a wonderful way for me personally, to do research and dialogue and discussions and even teach without burdening about a particular piece or having to present it in a space that's got a deadline and a budget, etc. But to really have it open-ended, which is why it's been going on for 14 years, basically. And it keeps going and keeps evolving. And we're just letting it be. And I think there's a wonderful freedom to create that way and to have dialogues and a context that's not demanding by the art practice or art context.
We also have a question from Lisa, which I'll read for the YouTube audience. During any of your dinners, did the topic of humans being eaten, being food for other animals come up? For example, the tiger or dragon eats humans. I ask because your project to eat and be eaten reminded me of Val Plumwood, philosopher and ecological thinker who, after almost being eaten by a crocodile, realized that we are all food, which changed her whole philosophy as a starting point for the rejection of human exceptionalism.
I love that. I want to find out more. That's what I'm talking about. This project just keeps coming up with new angles about our relationship with food and with animals. So the premise, absolutely, it comes up. And it comes up, for instance, with the tiger, of course. It comes up with the snake, generally the predators. But we also bring it into, for instance, if you're an ox or a pig, in my example, if you bring a pork dish to the table, if I would do that, I'm basically saying I'm offering myself, which is a different way to start thinking about the food you're eating. And so that kind of economy of food is what I think we need more and more. Linda Weintraub comes to mind. She's a horse. She's hosted a dinner. She's an environmentalist, ecocentric, amazing author, artist. And she really brought it to the table in many ways, that she actually raises pigs, for instance, gives them a name and has a whole relationship with them, and then slaughters them, makes food and spreads the food around, which horrifies a lot of her friends that are, pure vegetarians and feel that they can somehow make a judgment on it. But she does it very consciously for people to start thinking about how this interconnected web of food happens and how it happens in relation to industrialization in particular, and then the wild. And when we're talking about the wild, it's something that we should leave alone. And we're entering into areas that we should leave alone. We need to leave alone these areas that are producing so much complexity, ecological wonder, really, that keeps us alive without our being conscious of it. So this is a really important point you bring up, absolutely.
Also, specifically, since it's something that we talked about last year, could you say a few things about the Pacific Standard Time project that you're doing in LA with Anu Vikram?
So a lot of my work is very much related to sound. In fact, for Hawk Zodiac, about now it's 4 years ago at a sound art festival, I did a piece that was just about the sounds of these animals that they make, the language of these animals going around the wheel, and having people participate during the sound. I dropped out of art school and formed a band in New York in the 80s and just learned about collaboration and sound, and it's remained with me in my practice. And now it's really come to a head with this proposal and exhibition that I'm planning with Anuradha Vikram that's dealing with climate change. So it's called Atmosphere of Sound, Sound Arts in the Age of Climate Disruption. And we're consciously saying disruption, not change, because change is something that we accept and that's normal. Disruption is something we're doing. And so we're looking at artists from different parts of the world who are working with the environment specifically, whether it's underwater noise or noise in the skies and space, with animals, with the environment, ecology. And we have already done 2 full years of research, and artists were in residence online with us. You can look it up. Absolutely. I can put a link actually in the chat. So this is another whole aspect of work that I think is really coming to a head now. I'm seeing more and more artists move towards sound and looking at sound, and some of it is actually what we don't hear, what we don't see. It's frequencies, it's vibrations that have an impact for us. And if we have awareness of these sounds and frequencies and vibrations, again, it shifts our perception. We're too much in the visual world, especially in the art world, and I'm feeling really good that it's moving more into thinking, feeling the invisible and the inaudible.
Thank you. And that certainly ties in with the discussions that we were having with Tomás Saraceno about spiders and vibrations and webs as well.
Exactly, exactly.
So unless there's any other further questions, I think we might wrap it up there. Any last comments, questions? Warren, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I was just, I was going to say related to what Tomás Saraceno was doing, and also I knew, some of the other people that we've had here, Anushka and all that, but you said that. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria, and please pass on our thanks to Siddharth as well. For those of you in the program, we will see you back here at 1 o'clock. And for those of you online, we will meet tomorrow with our next lecture, which will be Analisa Teachworth, actually. So very excited for that discussion as well. So we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks, Victoria.
Bye. Thank you.